I am Hilary Davis. I am a therapist at Touchstone Therapy Center. We are a therapy center in Vernon Hills. We're called a multidisciplinary clinic because we offer behavioral health, occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy for everyone from children to adults. Part of the reason why we were founded is to be a one-stop shop supporting families, which is our mission, is to focus on families, so that you could be in therapy and your kid could be in OT, or maybe you have a kid with special needs and you're getting parenting support at the same time, or that two siblings are being seen at the same time, or a co-treat, so that people can spend more time together with their families instead of running from clinic to clinic. We have a large group of therapists that have expertise in all areas, from couples counseling, family counseling, play therapy with kids. Personally, for me, just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am a marriage and family therapist, which means I see couples and I see families. I have a background of working with children and adolescents as well, with a specialty in anxiety and trauma, and I am a certified Gottman therapist. So, with that said, today we're going to be talking about appreciating diversity and raising an inclusive child. And I want to give a quick disclaimer. As Megan said, we're going to do a short 30-minute presentation, then open it up for questions if you have that. And as we go on, if you have questions, you can pop them in the chat or send them to Megan directly. Because we're presenting over a short amount of time, this is a topic where there is so much to discuss. And, I just want to put out there as a disclaimer, we're just kind of scratching the surface. So, we're always here if anyone has any further questions. Any of the stuff we're presenting on today could be a whole presentation in itself, but I did want to put that out there. And because of that, today we're going to be focusing under the umbrella of diversity, we're going to be focusing on ethnicity, disability, and neurodiversity. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit more. But I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of what we'll be talking about today. That does not mean if you have other questions that are related to diversity or raising an inclusive child, that, feel free again to just pop them in the chat and we will address them as we continue on. So let's jump in. So, what is the benefit of diversity and inclusion when it comes to schools? When we foster inclusivity in schools, it's essential for creating environments where all students feel welcome, supported, and empowered to succeed academically, socially, and emotionally. Exposure to diverse perspectives and experiences fosters critical thinking skills and creativity among students. And inclusive classrooms encourage students to question stereotypes, challenge biases, and explore different viewpoints, leading to deeper learning and greater intellectual growth. I also want to make the connection here that when we talk about diversity, we're working on helping our kids be more inclusive and experience the benefits of a diverse environment, but they're also getting that for themselves as well. Everyone has strengths and everyone has challenges. And today we're looking at certain boxes of those. But when we teach kids to be empathetic in situations where there are diverse situations, we're also helping them to understand that everyone's different, including them, and that's okay. And that we bring strengths to the table. And I feel that that's an important thing that needs to be voiced when we talk about diversity, because it's not just about others. It's about how we feel about ourselves as well. And that helps everyone to go, we want to appreciate everyone's differences, including our children. So one of the quotes that I like that I wanted to put up that went along with this is that true inclusion begins at home, where differences are celebrated, kindness is cultivated, and empathy is nurtured. Home is where the foundation starts. Our kids are exposed to a lot at school. They run into different situations in school and in the community. But as parents and families, we are creating that foundation for our kids to go into some of these environments where they're going to experience diverse situations and diverse populations. So I want to take a moment because today we're talking about neurodiversity, disability, and ethnicity to break down some basic definitions of each of these topics. I also want to clarify that these are not the only definitions that can be used. You can go on the internet and there is so much information out there, and I would encourage everyone to go and do that. But for the purpose of this presentation, we selected these definitions because they are very clear and concise. And we'll be talking about this a little bit later, but when we're talking about diversity, inclusion, specific populations. The goal is to keep it clear and concise so that it's easy for kids and adolescents to take in that information, to understand it, and then incorporate it into the way that they are experiencing the world. So, when we're talking about disability for the purpose of today, what we're talking about is anything that encompasses physical, sensory, cognitive, and developmental impairments that may limit a person's ability to engage in certain activities or tasks. Ethnicity, we're referring to the cultural, racial, or national characteristics that define a group of people. Now, who's defining that group of people is up for debate, and that can be a whole nother conversation on its own. But this is the definition that we're going to use for today, and that would be a springboard then to talk about with your kids about who gets to define what that group of people is, or what those cultural, racial, or national characteristics are, and what are some of the things that are good about that, and what are some things that could be negative about that as well. Also, we're talking about neurodiversity, which is recognizing and respecting the natural variations in the human brain functions, including autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and other neurological differences. Now, I also want to point out neurodiversity is a huge umbrella, and there are so many things that can go under it, and not just what was mentioned here in this definition. Everyone's brains are wired differently. And as more research is coming out, we're finding that, there are a lot of differences in which the way the brain processes information, and all of that can fall under the umbrella of neurodiversity, including how we learn. Are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner? So I would encourage everybody to find out more information on each of these topics. Again, we're providing a brief definition, but there's so much that is out there to be able to teach kids in each of these subjects. So what are the benefits about teaching kids about inclusion? When we teach kids about inclusion, they're enriching their perspectives. When we expose kids to diverse backgrounds and experiences, we create kids that are more creative, they're more innovative, they have better problem-solving skills. We teach them how to interact with the world around them, where the boundaries are, what's okay, what's not okay in it, and that helps set them up for adulthood. It also helps them to develop empathy. It's very easy to get stuck in our own viewpoints, but when we interact with individuals from diverse backgrounds and we start conversations around that are appropriate, it allows us to understand what other people are going through, and that helps to build empathy skills, which again are going to be crucial as kids move into emerging adulthood. It also helps with building compassion and understanding. So it also, when we develop more empathy, we have different perspectives, it helps us to build a stronger community, because inclusive communities are more resilient, cohesive, and supportive. And as I was mentioning before, it helps with personal growth. When we embrace diversity, it leads kids to expand their worldview. And again, not only how they look at the world in general, but how they see themselves and their place in it. So all of these things are helping kids to prepare themselves for going out in the world, wherever they may live, whatever they may do. And it starts when they are younger. A lot of times we might be talking about some of this stuff when kids are a little bit older, or deciding, is it appropriate when they're younger? But we can build the basic foundations when kids are young and continue to build on as they get older. I wanted to take a moment to talk about dispelling common myths and misconceptions. Now, these are not, again, all of the things that may be heard, but we wanted to pick out some phrases that are heard sometimes when we're talking about diversity, neurodiversity, disability, ethnicity, and to really kind of pick apart why it's important to help kids to understand what might be a misconception. And part of that is because some of these phrases, people might think that, you know, they're being they're helping to be supportive by saying all children are colorblind or we're all the same. But some of that phrasing, which might seem innocuous or to a person might feel like they're actually doing something good, doesn't take into account that all people are different, and that's actually okay. When we buy into some of these myths and misconceptions, it can invalidate someone else's lived experience, and it can make people feel dismissed about the experiences that they have. You can miss opportunities where there's an opportunity to teach your children or to build empathy skills. It also can perpetuate stereotypes, and it can perpetuate inequality by ignoring differences, and it can actually help prevent equal access to services, to being able to be in society a little bit differently. And so that is why, you know, we want to take a look at this and really kind of check ourselves and go, why is it important to address this with kids? Also, it's important because we may do things at home, but we don't always know what our kids are being exposed to at school with their peers, through social media, through their peers who might be on social media, even if you don't have access to social media at home. So I'm just going to go through a few of them today. And again, this does not encompass all the things that are heard, but just to kind of give you an example, when we say things like, we're all the same, again, that can affect people's experience of what it's like to be diverse or be from a diverse population. And acknowledging differences doesn't invalidate the concept of shared humanity. And in fact, what it does is it enriches the tapestry of our collective experience. Again, building empathy, focusing on, you know, how the things that are different about us can be strengths and actually can help society as a whole. Sometimes you hear the phrase talking about differences is divisive. And in this day and age, certainly there are people that are talking about that all the time. However, if we're having conversations where we're being respectful and we are honoring someone else's experience and trying to learn about that in respectful conversations, what that can actually do is to foster more understanding and create a culture of inclusivity. You don't have to agree with someone to understand what their experience is like. And so while there is that fear that sometimes you hear a lot of, well, if we talk about this, or if, you know, we should be talking about the things that are the same, we're actually doing a disservice to our kids and to the community at large. Sometimes you hear the phrase, well, kids are colorblind. I don't know about any of you. I'm assuming if you're all on here as a District 73 presentation that you have kids, but if you've had a toddler shout out something really loud at a restaurant, they are noticing things all the time. Kids are always aware of what is going on around them and noticing differences. And to say that the goal is to be colorblind doesn't take into account that they are going to notice differences. They are thinking about those things. And so you want to acknowledge that, yes, people are different in different ways, and that's okay. And that helps to develop a healthy attitude. There's also phrases like disability is a disadvantage, but disabilities don't define a person's worth. And what we really want to focus on is helping kids to understand that, you know, we can focus on abilities and how to accommodate people who might have challenges and lean into their strengths. Same thing. People will say sometimes like neurodiverse individuals can't thrive. That doesn't take into account the broad spectrum of what neurodiversity is and how, you know, people who are neurodiverse have incredible strengths and can contribute in many ways. And we all can do that too. So talking about some of this with your kids is helpful because you may talk about it at home, but keeping up with it regularly, checking in on what you're hearing at school, what people are hearing from their peers is important, because then you can take that time to look at what can we do to give facts, to work on focusing on those strengths instead of focusing on the challenges that are being presented. So strategies for teaching inclusivity. We're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive on this in a second, but you've heard me talk about this a little bit so far. You want to encourage empathy, and part of how we create empathy is to create open conversations with kids and helping them to feel safe enough to have an open conversation. If you were at one of our presentations earlier in the year, we have a lovely handout that we can send to everybody that goes through, about 10 steps of how to create an open conversation with kids to get them to open up and talk with you, as opposed to, the how was school and you get it was fine sort of thing. Also, you want to look at addressing stereotypes and biases. Just as we were just talking about before. You want to engage in perspective taking activities and encourage curiosity. So one of the things that we do in our office sometimes is we will talk about different activities to increase perspective taking. One of the things that kids seem to like a lot is we have a box of shoes, and we might have them pull out those shoes and have them imagine, well, what is the person who might live in these shoes look like? What might they feel like? What are some of the things that they may do to help teach kids how to get out of their own heads and focus more on what other people's experiences are? If they have a family member who's experiencing a disability or is neurodiverse, we might do some activities like there was one example where we had someone whose family member was starting to experience some visual impairment. And we worked with that family member who had visual impairment to work to create an activity around decreasing that kid's eyesight in a safe situation to experience what was that like to feel like if you were losing your eyesight. What could you do? And to help increase that empathy to be able to help that family member more. So there's different creative things that you can do with your kids to help them learn how to do more perspective activities, perspective taking activities, and start to focus on others instead of just focusing on their own experience. And of course, collaborating with the school and the community. So there's two things I wanted to talk about as we kind of go a little bit more into this, and that's teaching kids about sensitive topics and talking to your kids about sensitive topics. And you might go, okay, well, why are we talking about sensitive topics? We're talking about, neurodiversity, disability, and ethnicity. And we use the phrase in our office, sensitive topics, as an umbrella because it encompasses pretty much anything that might feel like a trigger topic. And when kids have a framework or a structure that they can refer to, oh, this is what I do when there's a sensitive topic, it's easier for them to pick those skills out and be able to incorporate them in the real world. So giving a broad generalization of sensitive topics helps them to know what skills they need to pull out. And so that's the terminology we're going to use for today. We actually have a handout, I'll show you right now, that will be accessible to you as well, that goes a little bit more into what these are. So that we will be sending out to everyone that is attending today. And I believe Megan has a copy of those. And maybe, Megan, if you have the opportunity to pop that in the chat, that would be helpful. So when we teach kids about sensitive topics, kind of like I was just saying, we first want to say, well, what is a sensitive topic? So in the effort of keeping things clear and concise, sensitive topics can evoke strong emotions. It could be sadness, hurt, excitement, frustration. And they're the things that we want kids or want to encourage kids to think about before speaking and to choose their words carefully so that they don't cause unintentional harm. When we're talking to kids about how do you identify what is a sensitive topic, you can give some broad examples, like it could be physical differences, behavioral variations, it could be cultural differences, it could be learning differences. But giving them some examples of these are categories that we might be looking at helps them to understand, knowing when and how to say something. And when we're moving into knowing how and when to say something, a lot of times what we're talking about is consent, which is one of my favorite topics and is a whole nother presentation on its own. But when we're talking about topics that your kids might be curious about, but we want to be respectful of others, part of what we're trying to teach them is that you want to ask permission before you ask that question. And then you want to respect the wishes of what that person decides to answer. So let's say you have a kid and they're pointing out a physical difference in someone. You want to teach them that if someone expresses discomfort or they indicate that they do not want to talk about it, that's okay, and to respect their wishes. Now, sometimes for kids, they're like, but I'm bursting. I have a lot of questions. I want to know. What you can do is you can let them know, okay, after you've sought permission and now you have to wait, you can go and find a trusted adult. It could be a family member. It could be a parent. If it's in the school, it could be, a teacher or a school social worker. And you can bring those questions up to them, but that we really want to respect the boundaries of the person that they're asking whatever their questions are. And so that shows empathy and consideration for other people's feelings and is a really great skill to be teaching kids as well. And you can support your kids in terms of teaching them about sensitive topics by providing a safe space for discussion and also helping them to normalize differences. When we emphasize the importance of diversity and inclusion, by teaching them to our kids, what we're really doing is we're helping them to appreciate and respect the differences among individuals. So we can help them to celebrate diversity and learn from other people's unique perspectives and experiences. Now, the actual talking about sensitive topics, that's a different set of skills. And so what we're looking at doing as parents is to find out what your kids already know and where they know it from, which is also incredibly important. For a lot of parents, when a topic comes up, they may start to talk about their own thoughts and feelings or their perspectives on things. But if we're trying to engage kids in an open conversation around diversity and inclusion, and really actually anything in general, you first want to go on a fact-finding mission. You want to ask them how they are defining that topic, because that gives you a better sense of what they've learned so far and where they're learning it from. Are they hearing it on the playground? Are they hearing it at lunch? If your kids have access to social media, I cannot tell you in our house, like whenever my kids bring up a statement, the first thing I say is, did we get that from TikTok or from YouTube or from Instagram, although they're not on Instagram because I've been told that's for older people. But where are you getting your information, and how do we figure out what's a reliable source of information? And even if your kids don't have access to social media, they're too young, they may be talking to kids who have older siblings, or they may be talking to kids who do have access to social media and are seeing things on the internet who are then sharing that with them. So finding out more about where they've gotten that information, as well as what their own thoughts and observations are on the subject, will help you to determine where the conversation needs to go. You also, as I said before, want to keep your part and your comments really simple and concise. Long conversations, and I'm sure everyone here has seen this, can lead to kids tuning out and getting distracted. And so really what we want to create is a back and forth with kids. You want to give a little bit of information, have it be very clear and to the point, and then you want to ask them a question and get their observation so that you can start having a back and forth conversation. You also want to look for unexpected opportunities. Timing matters. It's really interesting. Two of the times that in our practice we hear about all the time are kids will start talking right before bed, which makes sense because they're starting to settle down and relax for the day. They're reviewing things in their mind. They also talk a lot in cars, which is interesting because it's completely contradictory to what we teach kids. Like you have to look at people and be, facing them when you're talking to them. But in the car, we don't have to look at people. We know that there's a beginning, middle, and end. The car ride is going to end. The conversation will end at some point. And that can help them to actually be more receptive to conversations. And you also want to look for unexpected opportunities wherever you go. When you're traveling, if you're in the city and you're exposed to different situations and experiences, those are really great opportunities to bring up some of these conversations around diversity as well. You want to make sure that you yourself are providing clear and specific information. Acknowledge facts, like I was saying before, review some misconceptions. You also might consider taking out some books from the library or watching a movie or a TV show that's going to bait a conversation that is going to bring up those topics and maybe feel a little bit more organic for the kids to be able to talk about some of their thoughts and feelings on some of the topics that they might be reading about or watching. And of course, we want to promote kindness and empathy. There's certain things that when it comes to diversity, you want to talk about, like diversity etiquette or disability etiquette. What are okay things to say? What are things that are not okay to say? You might talk to them about terms like cultural appropriation. What is it? And why do you want to be aware of it? You want to talk about, what are sensitive topics? What are not sensitive topics? You want to help them to be upstanders and support, other kids or people in the community when they see things happen instead of being a bystander. And you want to work on that perspective taking, because when we teach inclusivity, we're also teaching kids to discourage labeling and pointing out challenges and really choosing to focus on strengths instead. So these are not all the further considerations, but I did want to point out a couple more things because, again, I know we're just kind of scratching the surface here today. But when we're talking about ethnicity, we also want to talk to kids about appreciating cultural differences. And what does that look like? What does that mean? How do we do that? You want to explain the importance of cultural heritage and what that means to that person's culture so that we can avoid, things where maybe they're hearing people making fun of someone, or, they think it's okay, or they're like, my friend gave me a pass. And you might say, okay. And that's also not okay. Like if we're appreciating other people's culture, we have to take a lot of things into consideration. For neurodiversity, we want to look at understanding different cognitive styles and abilities, and that not everybody processes in the same way. And what does that look like? And you want to highlight those strengths and talents of neurodiverse individuals. And in the realm of disabilities, what we're also talking about is emphasizing abilities rather than limitations. And we're also wanting our kids to advocate for accessibility and inclusivity in all environments. Now, as parents, there are a couple things that you might want to think about, as you're entering some of these conversations or when things come up with kids. And the first one is to be aware of your own biases. I can't speak for every counseling program that's out there, but I know that the ones that I've been in and some of the subsequent trainings that I've been in have had bias training where you're actually forced to kind of confront certain things when it comes to culture, diversity, neurodiversity, disabilities in various ways to see where your edge of feeling uncomfortable is and to help you recognize where your biases are. And that's really important as a therapist, because that way it doesn't come out in session. You've kind of done some of the work on your own. And I've always found that incredibly helpful and useful. And I think it's something that as a parent, it's worth considering, because sometimes we don't know where our biases are until we're in a situation when it happens. And so there are different ways to kind of look at how to check your own biases, but it's worth considering and taking a look at that for yourself before you enter into a conversation with your kids, or being able to acknowledge that with your kids. We want to set examples at home that are good and foster inclusivity. And, since sometimes opportunities don't always present themselves naturally, creating opportunities where you're volunteering or offering to help with specific charities, groups, and whatnot the community, can help increase the opportunities that you have to be able to talk about these things as well. So this is not an inclusive list. And if you would like one, like it can go, we have one that can go on 4 pages, but I wanted to highlight a few things that I felt are helpful when we're looking at learning more about diversity, learning more about specific populations. There are some wonderful children's books that are out there. There's some podcasts that are great for parents, and you can look at specifically for certain episodes, and we do have a list of some of those as well. There are some websites I particularly wanted to point out. There's a video about what is diversity that's like just a couple minutes long, and there's one on disability etiquette, and those are great, especially for visual learners who need to see something while they're hearing about it too. And they're both really good resources as well. And like I said, if you would like a more extensive list of resources, we can provide that. But I just wanted to put out a few things out there that I thought might be helpful. Again, this is something that we work with a lot in our clinic. We have a lot of therapists that are trained in a lot of different specialties. We do a lot of activities at the clinic, including groups, presentations. We do family counseling and social skills groups to help kids to understand how to interact with others and what to do. And if you'd like more information on that, feel free to contact us at our email, or if you have additional questions, even after today, we are happy to address and answer them as well. And I wanted to thank you all for attending today. And again, just really reiterating that this is just scratching the surface of what is diversity, what does that mean in terms of ethnicity and disability and neurodiversity, but that there's so much out there to learn. And I appreciate you kind of sticking with and listening to this today. And now, I want to move into the question and answer portion. So I think we're going to pause for a moment so that we can stop the recording. And if you guys have any questions, we'll start taking a look at those as well.